Hello, friends. It's Peter Paul Van Camp here once again on the day after Pancake Day. Well, you know me and how I celebrate the knobby pancake, and I wrote a piece back in 1983 it was, and this is, let's call this a special edition of the monthly This Day in Van Camp Performance History series of home broadcasts. I'm wearing a shirt which, to my eye at least, rather resembles a tablecloth, and it seems pertinent for our topic. Because I'm going to talk about the piece called I Want a Pancake, which I wrote back in 1983, and it began just around Shrove Tuesday, the day before Lent, and pancakes were being served citywide, it seemed. I was living in Winnipeg then, and I got to thinking, there are so many ways of saying pancake. You have hot cake, you have griddle cake, you have batter cake, you have flapjack, you have hoe cake, flannel cake, and so forth. And so I guess I have a tendency, you may have noticed this over time, that I like to say the same thing in as many different ways as I can think of, sometimes within a piece. And I wanted to work all these descriptive terms into one piece celebrating pancakes, which at our house, when I was growing up, my brother and I and Dad were only allowed to have pancakes by mother's decree on Sundays. It was a Sunday thing. So when Sunday came around, we'd get all excited and think, oh, pancakes. It wasn't every Sunday, but some certain Sundays, but only Sundays. And so that was part of the piece. And let's see. Oh yes, the title, I Want a Pancake. That came, I found that there was an oratorio, a comical oratorio written by a fellow named John Phoenix. That was his pen name. His real name was George Horatio Derby, and he was an army officer in the 1850s, stationed in around San Diego, California. And so as John Phoenix, he wrote this piece called The Plains, which he credited to Jabez Tarbox, Esquire. And there was this aria, a one-line aria that he composed, which was made up of these words, "Oh, marm, I want a pancake." And I read that, and I thought, oh, that I should work that into my piece. And so time went by, and I began to assemble things, and then I took a trip to the Middle East. I woke up one morning in Winnipeg, flew to Toronto. By mid-afternoon or early evening, I was in Zurich, Switzerland, and by midnight, deplaned in Tel Aviv, Israel. And well, that's a story for another day. But on that day, and on subsequent days, as I was walking around that fine city, I was thinking about my pancake piece, which had stalled rather back at home in Winnipeg, and so part of the reason for my journey was to refresh my mind. And I was walking around in the Arab quarter of Tel Aviv, the section of the city called Jaffa or Yaffo, depending, and a line came into my head. And I thought, oh, I have to remember this. And I had a pencil, but I had no paper. And so I looked around. And there on the ground was a discarded cigarette package. I believe they were Time cigarettes, one of the popular Israeli brands. And I opened up the discarded refuse of it, and to the writing surface inside, and I wrote down whatever lines had occurred to me as I was strolling about in the early evening. And so it had an international flavor, you might say. Part of this piece was written in Israel. And then when I got back to Winnipeg, somewhere along the way, I had determined that this was going to be a catchy piece. I needed to write something catchy and bouncy, and I was reminded of my mother's 78 RPM record collection, and I've always thought RPM might as well stand for Revelations Per Moment, because there was so much to be learned from those records. And the one in particular was a boogie woogie piece. She favored that kind of music and played it in almost incessantly on Sundays. And while pancakes were being prepared in the kitchen, we'd be listening to tunes like Beat Me Daddy, Ate to the Bar. And on the B side of that was Scrub Me Mama with a boogie beat. And so there was already an association in my mind between that tune and the pancakes which would later be served to us. So it was a natural fit. And let's see what else happened. Well, I got back to Winnipeg in May. I was writing, and in June I had a chance to perform the piece at Old Market Square in Winnipeg on a Sunday, and it went over pretty small. I guess it just wasn't ready. I don't remember at what point I had added the harmonica solo, which became a feature between the second and third verse. But maybe I hadn't come to that yet, or maybe I just hadn't worked it out properly. Anyway, it wasn't until the next month, July of 1983, still at the Winnipeg Folk Festival, when I had a drummer backing me up, Ian Haslam, and on the main stage there, and I had some time to myself, and the audience seemed to take to it. And so the piece was on its way. I Want a Pancake. It had, of course, that chorus. And now this spatula, which I would wave in the air, and Mama, oh, I want a pancake. And then the spatula would be the cue, as we say in the show world, for the audience to repeat those lines, as many of you will know. This particular spatula was gifted me in Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia. And at that time I was on a tour, the Great Canadian Folk Music Express, and one of the big acts on that tour was Rita McNeil and her band. There was David McIsaac and Scott McMillan and Ralph Dillon and the great John Alphonse on the drums, and they got in the habit of backing me on this piece, and it really became something to contend with in the show, as I felt. And so years passed, and it was part of my repertoire for a very long time. And then, of course, Al Simmons made his excellent recording of it in the 90s. And I rewrote one of the verses, the last verse, because I forget just why, but Al wanted something different, where I would say, have the part about the narrator of the song standing outside of the church as the people came out of the after the service. I'd be riding around the block on my bicycle, making pancakes as I pedaled on past. And then I'd stop, and they would come out, and I would ask them, say, well, everyone, how'd you like the service? Oh, son of a gun, that sermon in there made us nervous. What was it on? I'd ask. We couldn't tell you. The preacher, he's from Berlin, so the sermon was in German. Oh, the sermon was in German. I thought that was catchy, perhaps even amusing. And so I had the preacher come out and say, Mutter, ach, ich wollen ein Pfannkuchen. And I go on, I guess he said in German, Mama, oh, I want a pancake. So that's that part of the story. I don't know if you need to know anything else, but I was looking at the calendar on the wall back here and noticed that it had been Pancake Day yesterday, and I wondered if one day is enough for pancakes. Perhaps it was. But anyway, that's the story. That's the installment. I'll be back in March with more of these tales. Perhaps I'll wear a different shirt and have a different topic for you, but I just felt like going on at length, as I do, about pancakes today. And so, all shriven and shaven, and that's the story. Hope you enjoyed it. If you learned something, don't blame me. And enjoy the rest of your day and have a very pleasant Lent. Peter Paul Van Camp here, signing off for now.